Hey guys, it's Always Improving, and today I wanted to show you one of my paintings that I made back in 2016. This was the first watercolor painting that I remember making when I was kind of getting more into the paints themselves. It was over 3 years ago, probably about 3.5 years ago, that I created this, and while it's definitely not the best thing I've ever created. It's a little dingy right now, but you can tell that a lot of the techniques I used weren't really watercolor techniques. It almost looks as though I was kind of trying to use acrylics. You can kind of see like the certain paint strokes and the glob of paint I used for the fish's eyes here. It's kind of obvious I didn't really know what I was doing. I was using tube watercolors because they had read they were better, but I was kind of using them as they were acrylics almost. So there's a lot of things I would change about this piece, and today I wanted to paint this piece again with my current knowledge and my current art skill and see how it turns out, see what I have learned, and see my progress since I have begun. So yeah, I wanted to repaint this. But before we can do that, I want to sketch out just a couple of ideas and kind of get a good composition down so that we can easily paint this. With that sketch worked out, I think this composition will work and I can get out my watercolor paper. And for this illustration, I will be using Canson XL watercolor paper, mostly because the original painting that I did was on this same type of paper, and I kind of want to keep that the same for both of our illustrations. So here it is, and besides the paper, I also got out my brushes and a water cup, along with my paints, which right now are a mixture of the Turner watercolors I had in here, and I also added a couple of my Winsor & Newton colors from my Cotman set. If you saw, I used those in my last video for practicing some eyes with watercolor, and I did see some really good pigments that I like, especially with how cool their red is in my Turner set. I've noticed that it's less cool than the Winsor & Newton one, and so that's a really fun new kind of color to play with in my illustrations. And that's all the supplies I need, so I'm going to go ahead and begin my first sketch on this piece of paper. I will use a mixture of my pencil and watercolor pencil. And now that the sketch is finalized, I can begin to paint. I decided to use the same color scheme that I used for my first piece because I feel like I really should, especially because I changed the composition so much. So I'm going to use the same elements and the same colors, but a different composition. And yeah, here we go. So, like the original painting, I wanted to make sure that the jellyfish really stood out. It was a vibrant color. Even though it wasn't the main point in the original, I really, really loved the yellow and the vibrancy of the jellyfish. So I wanted to really convey that and kind of make it more of a focal point. So that's what I started out with. I also decided to add a bit more realism and a bit more texture to the jellyfish and its tentacles. Instead of only doing the thin kind of just random tentacles, I added kind of like bigger ones and smaller ones as well to give it a little more variation. And I also added some really nice color a color gradient on those bigger tentacles from kind of a yellow color to more of a greenish blue color at the bottom, and I think it really turned out looking interesting and I like it a lot. Next, I went in and added the orange to the fish. I kind of wanted them to be a little less saturated, but I also wanted them to stand out. So I wasn't sure at the beginning how I really wanted their color to be, so I just kind of gave it a base coat of orange with some darker shades at the front and kind of faded to the back just to kind of because I didn't know exactly what I wanted. So I did that first. And then I moved on to their tails, which I wanted to do blue because that's kind of how they were in the original, although they didn't really have tails, I noticed in the original. They almost looked like comets or something. I don't know. They didn't really have tails. So I added tails to them and made them blue. And I also added streaks in the fish because with my acrylic painting, I meant my watercolor painting, but the watercolor painting in the beginning looked like acrylic because it had those streaks. So I wanted to add that to this piece by making the fish streaky in their texture, not necessarily the paint itself, but I wanted to add texture to them and make them look interesting. Now I am adding the first coat of the ocean in the background. I kind of realized later that I shouldn't have started from the top because I wanted the top to be lighter, but that's where I started. So the first layer is just a pretty plain blue color, and I ended up deciding to go over the fish to kind of push them to the background and make them less saturated. I finally made a decision and wanted them to stand out a lot less than the jellyfish, so I did go over them with a coat of blue paint. And here, I'm sorry, but I messed up my recording, so you don't actually see me doing the smaller tentacles very much of this jellyfish. You can kind of see the top half, but it's no big deal. Really, I just painted some blue lines that are the tentacles for the jellyfish. You didn't miss too much, but I'm sorry about that. Finally, I added some more depth to the water. I wanted to make it darker at the bottom and lighter at the top, how it was in my first illustration, but I was able to do that in a better way with more of an even gradient in this piece because I know a little bit more about making washes and making gradients with watercolors, and it was kind of fun. I do think I did a good job about going around the fish and the jellyfish and not getting them too dark because I didn't want the jellyfish to be blue at all, and I wanted the background to be different from the jellyfish. Finally, I added some just kind of details in the water that went over the fish in the background but not over the jellyfish to again emphasize that the jellyfish is the foreground of the piece and just kind of add some more variation and details to the water in the background. I added some finishing touches and that was it. And now that I finished this painting, I just want to say a few more concluding words about these pieces. Again, this one was created 3.5 years ago. I didn't know much about watercolors at all, and I had pretty cheap tube watercolors that I didn't know how to use. I used them almost like acrylics, and you can see it in this painting, and you can kind of see a really big style difference. I think I learned a little more about composition. I kind of realized that because I put the jellyfish, instead of kind of having the two components just thrown out on the page, I put the jellyfish in the middle and really tried to work the fish into the background. So I kind of learned about composition and how to get a focus point in your paintings. And you can also see that this one is definitely a different style. It's a little bit more concrete, less like abstract, I would say, than this one. And also it's a lot more watercolor. You can kind of tell like it's watercolor because of the different layers you get and the nice clean smooth gradients and flat washes that you can kind of see with some shading, of course. Meanwhile in this, it feels more like, I don't know, almost again like an acrylic piece where there's some heavy areas of paint and kind of blended layers. They're not necessarily layer on layer on layer and transparent paint like I did in the yellow section. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I do think that this piece is a lot different than my current one, and it has its own merits, and I really do like it still. But this one kind of represents more of what I am now and more of what I paint now, especially because I don't paint see things though. It's not necessarily a better version, I would say. It's just a different version. It's a newer version. It's more of how I paint now, and it's just kind of a different style. So I hope you enjoyed seeing the process of me painting this newer version of my first watercolor piece, and I hope you will stay tuned for my next video. Bye!